Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. My name's Tom McKeaton. At the moment, I'm president of International Nuclear Services Japan, which is the UK Nuclear Decommissioning Authority's business in Japan. My role back in the UK with the NDA is on the strategy lead team as group head of international relations. So I have the pleasure of working very closely with our partners in Japan. It's fantastic to be back in Suruga. I moved to Tokyo 1 year ago, but I've spent much time since here. This has become my second home, so it's great to be here, especially at such a fantastic time of year. People, they're important, and hopefully what I can do here is give a little bit of an insight into how our organisation and our thinking has progressed in terms of tackling the UK's nuclear legacy. How our approach to addressing skills gaps and developing talent and capability has started to develop further as well. So I think I'm going to try and touch on four things. First of all, I'm going to run through a little bit about who we are and what we do. I'm going to talk, secondly, about our strategy and our people strategy and its link to a kind of national and international context. Third, I'm then going to talk about some of the direct interventions we've made to make sure that we are developing the skills and talent that we need through the Nuclear Graduate Scheme, which seeks to address a very particular skills gap that we foresaw. And then finally, I'll offer just a couple of reflections on that. So very quickly, the UK's nuclear legacy that the NDA is tasked to clean up dates back to the 1940s. And stems from a time when the kind of priorities and the driving force for developing the UK's nuclear industry, there was a number of different priorities, both R&D, defence and otherwise. And because of the speed at which things were happening, perhaps not as much attention as it should have been paid to how we would clean things up when we got there. So the NDA was established in 2005 by an Act of Parliament when, around the turn of the century, it was discussed within government that perhaps not as much attention had been paid to civil nuclear cleanup and addressing the liabilities that had built up within the 20th century. And the NDA's mission is to basically clean up the sites that it has and free them up for next planned use and societal benefit. The NDA reports into and is sponsored by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. We have a colleague here from DESNZ who spoke yesterday. So the government department sets the policy with support from the NDA. The NDA sets the strategy to deliver on its mission. And then our operating companies, our special purpose vehicles for actually doing operations and getting work done, do the delivery in partnership with the supply chain. So there's a very clear path through what the policy is, where the liabilities are held, and how we then build the plans and then interact commercially with the supply chain to be able to deliver those. The NDA sites, at the moment, there are 17, and as you can see, they are very geographically dispersed. We have a number and a broad range of challenges to clean up. We have the prototype fast reactor site and fuel cycle site Dunray at the top of Scotland. We have Sellafield on the northwest coast of England, which is where the largest scale of hazard and complexity and our spend sits. We also have the Magnox sites that stretch from the west coast of Wales down to the bottom of England as well. And we also have responsibility for the low-level waste repository, which is also near the Sellafield site. And we, in the future, are currently going through the process and have accountability for siting the geological disposal facility for intermediate level and high-level waste. You'll see on there also in blue that the current generating fleet of advanced gas-cooled reactors will transfer to the NDA's ownership upon defueling. So that will stretch from anywhere between next year for one site through to the mid-2030s for others. And the benefit of doing that is to adopt a fleet approach because many of those advanced gas-cooled reactors are sister sites to the Magnox reactors as well. We are predominantly funded by taxpayer money. We do earn a little bit of revenue, but that is very much from legacy contracts that the NDA inherited from its predecessor, British Nuclear Fuels. The NDA is not a commercial organisation, so we're very much focused on delivering value for money through the significant expenditure that we have on behalf of the taxpayer in addressing our mission. Now, while our sites are ultimately, and our businesses are ultimately the clients, the bulk of the work on the sites is delivered by the supply chain. So we have a very strong relationship and continue to develop to best interact with the supply chain and also increase involvement from small and medium enterprises to diversify the approaches that are being taken at the sites. Now, I wanted to touch a little bit about some of the changes that we've made recently, because I think this sets the scene for how we're taking a much more strategic view, long-term view, and have a much more flexible organisational approach to be able to address things like people and skills shortages. Previously, up until 2016, most of our operating sites were managed by private sector consortia, so we would run competitions for the management and operations of the site, transfer the uncertainty and the challenge wholesale, and they would put in place the plans and attempt to deliver the decommissioning and risk management missions. It became apparent that given the complexity of certainly sites like Sellafield and also the scale of the uncertainty at those sites, that the PBO model was perhaps not best placed and put too short-term a focus on some of the issues that we were dealing with. So since 2016, we have terminated those contracts and moved to a different approach where we deal with the supply chain at a different level rather than transferring the entire site. The NDA now owns these sites as direct subsidiaries, which allows us to adopt a group approach without the commercial interaction and the commercial layer between the NDA and its sites and the businesses, which means that as we develop our strategy, the NDA is still only 18 years old, and part of its initial remit is to get a better understanding of the hazards and the difficulties at the sites and develop the plans for those. As we have a better knowledge and can update our strategies and our policies accordingly, not having a commercial layer in between, that allows us to do that much more readily. Now, as I've said, this is important for what some of the things that we're doing on skills and talents gaps across all of our businesses, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So the NDA's key function is as a strategic body, and we are required by law to update publicly our strategy for how we see the delivery of our mission progressing every 5 years. And you'll see on the right-hand side here that the framework by which we choose to do that is through 4 driving themes and our critical enablers. So the 4 driving themes sit in the middle there as spent fuels, nuclear materials, integrated waste management, and then site decommissioning and remediation. And the critical enablers, which I'll come on to in a second, sit around that, and they are fundamentally concerned with how we develop the correct operating environment and do everything we can in an integrated way to set the scene for success on our sites. The strategy is actually our largest tool and the foundational platform of our stakeholder engagement. As we develop that strategy, it's quite a long-running process. It's not just the case that the document is produced and then published. We have many fora and mechanics to consult with our various stakeholders, both government, non-government, local and national and international, to develop our approaches. It's very much a collaborative endeavour, and we then consult on it before the strategy is published formally. Now, these are just some of our critical enablers, and you'll see very much that people is chief among those on there. That runs through everything that we do, but we recognise that things such as stakeholder relations, our socio-economic footprint, which again I'll come back to, but also things such as recent focuses on sustainability, diversity and inclusion, all set the scene for how we create the right environment around delivery of the mission. So I think just before I move on to the contents of our people strategy, the first thing to recognise is that we very much see this as working to a national and cross-industry context. Everything that we do, some of our high hazard and risk reduction work and some of our major capital builds on our site use the same supply chain, compete for the same resources and the same people as many other national priorities. And I think certainly as the context around net carbon zero and energy security continues to develop, further statements on energy policy is developed, and things such as advanced technologies come to the fore. We recognise that there is finite resources. We all have a collective role and an incentive to grow those resources, but we do need to look at this through a national lens and national prioritisation. And one of the means that we do that through is the Nuclear Skills Strategy Group. And you'll see from the slide there that brings together employers, government, regulators, trade unions, the broad and diverse range of stakeholders that we need to look at this from a strategic national perspective in the nuclear industry. The scale of the challenge in terms of meeting forecast demand is fairly great. And the roadmap that the NNSG has produced, the committee that runs the NNSG is chaired by the CEO of our waste division. The NDA plays a key role in as a bulk of kind of national spend on nuclear at the moment. We recognise our leadership role within that, and we see this as very much our role to contribute to. And I think one of the important things that we identify in there between nuclear skills and skills for nuclear. So there are, within our mission, very specific needs, such as alpha skills, glove box skills, other matters around environmental assessments, radiological protection, and so on. But there are also general skills that applied in the nuclear industry, but are also common to other industries as well. And those are things like welders, electricians, those enabling things that where it's not a particularly nuclear job, but more of a general construction or asset management or asset care. Now, our people strategy is pinned to and flows from the roadmap that was set by the NNSG. The NNSG roadmap was published in 2019. The NDA's most recent strategy was published in 2021. It's important to recognise that the context has shifted around that. These are not, and our strategy is not a static thing. We continue to evolve it. We have continual discussions, and it's very much an evolving process. This just happens to be a statement in time that sets out where we are, but we're very much pinned to the 2019 roadmap that was agreed cross-industry through the NNSG. So I think you'll see on there our statement of objectives and some of the focus areas that we wish to pursue. I think there's a few key commitments that sit further deeper down within that strategy that I'll come on to in a second, and I think that sets the scene for the next part that I'll talk about, which is the nuclear graduates. The consideration within the people strategy considers those nuclear versus non-nuclear skills, the remote geographies around our sites, which is a very key challenge in both sustaining supply chain interest and skills, because very often we are the only major employer and source of kind of economic and wealth generation in an area, but also the consideration of the macro factors that happen across industry. So, for example, as other net carbon zero technologies develop as well, we need to pay attention to that and understand how the supply chain interfaces with our sites. So some of the key public commitments in our people strategy, it committed all of our operating companies to producing strategic workforce mapping. Now, this requires both the changes that have happened organisationally. So previously, as each of our sites were very much run through particular contracts and there was very little interaction, there was no cross-group programmes, cross-group strategic themes. We now have the ability to take a much longer-term view, understand, as our understanding of what our mission entails, the skills requirements that we have. So we're still very early in this process, but we have secured some wins so far. But I think committing our businesses to get to grips and have deliverables against getting to grips with what we think we will need and when will allow us to deliver on the strategy. The other thing is it commits us to continued collaboration. So I've highlighted the need for a national approach to this topic, but we need to continue and reinforce and be continually mindful of the need to engage all of our stakeholders in finding the right answer to these questions. And then it makes a number of things about on the topic of attracting people into our industry, into our group, into our businesses. And I think there's two really important ones in there for me. Number one, about being good places to work and recognizing that some of the more recent trends around diversity and inclusion and some of the imperatives about engaging broader sections of society and making sure we have a good culture to work within is really important. And I think since the publication of this strategy, this has grown even further to the extent that you saw on the critical enablers slide, that we have particular programs and subject matter experts looking at how we build better places to work and increase diversity and inclusion. And then I think secondly, connects the kind of topic of our people strategy to the other strategies such as socioeconomics and how we make a social impact in the communities around our sites. So as we said, we have remote geographies. I think that's very similar to quite a lot of nuclear installations around the world. And we need to bear that in mind. We spend at Sellafield the bulk of our funds, around £3 billion a year. £2.1 billion of that directly falls within Cumbria. And we also make direct intervention on socioeconomic projects of around £20 to £30 million per annum. And we need to connect that to our people strategy because people don't want to live and work somewhere where there's not much to do. So how do we make the most impact of that? And I think really highlighting that this strategy comes as a cohesive whole and we're thinking at a systems level, not just on these individual downward-looking topics is really important. So I think one of the early wins that we had was around something called the Nuclear Graduates Scheme. Now, this was established in 2008 by the NDA, and I think it came to recognise that there was probably one generation's worth of recruitment missed around the 2000 mark. So a lot of the senior leaders within our group at the moment across our sites within the NDA came from a very particular cohort of people who came through in the early 90s. There is now a gap, so we've got some really good young people coming through. We've got a cliff edge of people who know how to operate very complex plants, very important plants to our mission, but also how to operate within the system that we do and the kind of public framework that we do, who are coming up towards retirement. It's really difficult to give someone who's really good 30 years experience in 10 years. So really, I think that this was trying to address the gap of future senior leaders within the industry and fast track and put on the right footing a new cohort and a continuing cohort of senior leaders, not just in engineering, but across the other enabling functions of what we do as well. So commercial activity, project management is hugely important. So currently at Sellafield site, we have a number of nationally significant major capital programs. Managing that to time to cost is a challenging thing, and we need a good flow of project management capability, but also people who can communicate and get across the messages and engage with our stakeholders across all of our topics. So a lot of what we do can be quite dense. Not every person is a nuclear engineer, so how do we engage and make sure we are taking considerations from our stakeholders in ways that is accessible and truly engaging to those? So the nuclear graduates kind of sought to fill that gap. As you'll see there, to date, we've had around 400 graduates, and those come from a range. So while the NDA runs it, but from a range of companies. So on there, you'll see NDA group companies such as Sellafield, Magnox. You'll also see supply chain companies, and you'll also see regulators as well. And the way that the program is structured, is to give a broader perspective on the industry, not just on waste management and decommissioning, but across the piece, from a regulatory point of view, from a generating point of view, different aspects of waste management decommissioning. So there's the opportunity, and this is very flexible, but the broad outline is that the graduates will go through that in largely 3 different secondments to different organisations. So their sponsoring organisation, whoever pays for them to go through that programme, is acknowledging that they will not have a short-term payback. They will have the first secondment in the first instance, but then that graduate will disappear for the remaining period of time on the programme, with the view that when they get that graduate back, they will have a much more rounded graduate who will be able to play a different role and fill a different gap to some of the other mechanics that we have in place to address some of the skill gaps, which I'll come on to in a second. So the other key thing to this is it equips the graduates to take hold of their own learning and development. So our training budget is provided, and they can choose to use that how they want, with some guidance and with some technical mentorship from their sponsoring organisations. But it's very much equipping the graduates with the tools to take hold of their own development. So this has been really successful so far. We're starting to see now the first kind of batch of graduates really reach senior positions. We need to continue that, and we continue to review this programme to ensure that it's up to date for the context that we need it to be in. Now, the other thing to say about this is that this is very much this is not the answer to everything, but this is from the skills mapping and the identification of gaps that we've had, and now we're starting to see in other areas. This is one mechanic to fix one problem. The other areas that we're committing lots of resource, both money and otherwise, to is around apprentices. So this is more vocational training, so both off-site training facilities and then getting people to the workplace to get them the hands-on experience. They will be paid while they do that, so they can learn and earn at the same time. So for people who perhaps don't wish to leave the community that they're in, are not interested in going to university, but still want a strong job within the nuclear sector, we're opening the pathways to be able to do that. Another good example where we've replicated the nuclear graduates model, but with another specific focus, is around cyber security. And that is common to us all, regardless of which part of the industry that we're in. Increasing need for cybersecurity. We're only as strong as our weakest link within cybersecurity. That's across the supply chain, that's within the NDA, that's internationally as we work with key partners. So we've established something that looks very similar, but is more bespoke to cyber for nuclear graduates. So that's a really important message, is that this isn't the answer to everything, but we are continually addressing and refining our plans. One of the success stories from the nuclear graduate scheme recently, and again, this plays back to our push for equality, diversity and inclusion, and how we empower people who perhaps haven't been previously or could do with a helping hand, is we have paired, as part of our collaboration with colleagues in JEA, we have a very strong counterpart-to-counterpart, peer-to-peer relationship with JEA. 2 young female engineers, one of the UK engineer, Hannah, is part of the nuclear graduate scheme, joined my team in the NDA, and both engineers spent 3 months in Japan, 3 months in the UK, touring both JEA facilities and NDA facilities to produce a roadmap for our future collaboration. That largely focuses at the moment on the fact that we both have reprocessing facilities that are heading towards decommissioning. How can we think about that together? How can we peer review each other's plans? And how do we potentially do joint R&D that reduces time and costs for both? So that's been a really big success, and we're looking to the next opportunity to be able to do that. So to bring this to a close and to take any questions, I think a few quick reflections. One, this is really tough and involves many, many stakeholders. That's always difficult. We don't have all of the answers, but it's a continual process. I think we've recognised that this is a system-level issue, hence why this is in our critical enablers and fundamentally connected to our decommissioning and waste management mission. How do we think about these things in an integrated way, not in a siloed way? And I think that the commitment to proper mapping across our sites and with our businesses has been really, really important, because we don't know what gaps we've got until we've actually identified those and taken a sensible forecast of where we think we can be based on the demand. So, for example, at Sellafield site, the big demand over the next 10 to 15 years is about major capital projects. How do we ensure that the short term's fit for purpose, the longer term's fit for purpose? Beyond that, as we move into further high hazard reduction in other areas, things like alpha skills will be much more required, glove box skills and so on. So how do we address that? And then finally, I think a really key thing behind this has been strong policy leadership. So as UK energy policy and has developed, and some of the stronger statements around net carbon zero and the nuclear industry, and things like commitment to 24 gigawatts by 2050, that has put real momentum into this and has kind of further developed the national conversation. I think the NDA recognises that at the moment, the bulk of the spend in the UK from a public point of view, we have a real commitment to be able to do this. We're in the business of risk management, and we need to invest now to ensure that we're mitigating risk further down. We in some areas, we don't have a choice. We would have to switch off work if we don't do this. So thank you for listening. I'm very happy to take any questions. Hopefully that was a bit useful, and we're always open to opportunities to collaborate on things like the nuclear graduate scheme and also common challenges that we have with colleagues at Fukushima Daiichi at the JEA site as well. We have a lot in common, and I think we'll do it better together. So thank you very much.
ありがとうございました。Thank you very much, Mr. Mackey Ting. それでは、会場内からのご質問を受けしたいと思いますが、いかがでしょうか。はい、ではマイクをお持ちいたします。お座りになったままで大丈夫ですよ。ありがとうございます。
福井大のでございます。どうもありがとうございます。先ほどの話の中で、女の子が一人 JA 日本に来て JA のところで、研修かなしてるって話をされたと思うんですよ。多分敦賀の方にも見学に来られたと思うんですが、この方は今は学生、それで NDA になんかインターンシップで来てて、でそのついでに NDA の身分で JA に来ているということでしょうか。
Yes, so that is correct. Hannah came to JEA as part of a joint program through the collaboration agreement that NDA has with JEA. We've done many things under that collaboration agreement to share experience at Fugen, at Monju, Tokai reprocessing plant, and other areas. Hannah was a nuclear graduate, so at the time that she came to Japan and participated in this program, she was an NDA-sponsored graduate, or a Sellafield-sponsored, our major site-sponsored graduate. She joined my team in the NDA and then participated in this program. Hannah's now finished the 2 years of the nuclear graduate scheme, and she has left Sellafield but joined our waste business in a different role as a waste specialist. So she continues to be in the NDA group, and her and Jury, who is the JEA engineer, continue to be in contact while they finalize their report.
そうすると大学にいるときにセラフィールドからお金をもらって、でそれの対価としてNDA に来ていると、そういう考え方で卒業して終わった後は NDA に就職するという、そういうことです。その最初にセラフィールドのお金を出したという、これをもらうことによってどういう要件がついてくるのかっていうのはちょっと知りたかったです。
So Hannah was a chemistry student at the University of Cambridge, and she then joined. So the nuclear graduate scheme is open, and there is a recruitment process that is open to all graduates. So they make an application, go through an assessment centre, and different sponsoring organisations. So some of those are NDA. Some of those are NDA sites and NDA businesses, and some of those from the supply chain or the regulator. They choose who they wish to sponsor, and then they pay to put the graduate through those 2 years of training. So once they have graduated, they then join the graduate scheme, and then following the graduate scheme, where they are employed by the NDA's training provider, Energous, they then join or are expected to join their sponsoring company. So Hannah finished university. Sellafield thought she was a good match for their needs. They paid for her to participate in the 2 years' worth of graduate training. So as part of that scheme, the NDA helped to facilitate the JEA interactions and scope the joint project. Hannah's now finished the 2 years on the nuclear graduate scheme, and she has now been employed formally by what could have been Sellafield, but it actually turned out to be our waste organisation, Nuclear Waste Services.
はい、わかりました。ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
その他会場いらっしゃいませんか？よろしいでしょうか。それでは以上でマーケティングさんの講演を終了させていただきます。今一度大きな拍手をお送りください。ありがとうございました。